Wyoming's 4 distinct seasons. A natural clock set by Earth's rotation and the tilt of its axis. It's driven the cycles of all life since before the dawn of humanity. The vernal equinox, when the length of day begins to exceed the night, marks the onset of spring. In the 1970s, biologist Frank Craighead began making observations on the seasonal timing of ecological events and published his popular book, For Everything There Is a Season. And the Craighead's research was a family affair.
Dad used to take us out all the time. So I look at it now, look at these photos, and there's a 10-year-old kid. You know, these are real living, live grizzly bears. And I'm sitting there with it, claws this big. And here's a 10-year-old kid holding it. The bear's alive, it's breathing, and it's looking at me. You know, it was just, I can't believe they did it.
"40 years later, Trevor Bloom is retracing the footsteps of Frank Craighead.
Do you think he was aware of climate change at that point?
He knew it was coming. I don't think he knew that it was already here, but it's definitely here.
And the results are startling.
Pretty crazy to think about that in just 45 years, the onset of spring is 2 to 3 weeks earlier now than observed by your father. I mean, that's not that long.
And it happened fast. He wasn't just looking at temperatures. He was out in the field looking at when the flowers bloomed and when the ground squirrels came up. The red-tailed hawks would come back. Snow had already gone. The ground squirrels were harder to find. You know, the bears, you see them digging up ground squirrels.
Spring is coming to a close, and the solstice marks the beginning of a new phase. Summer. June 21st marks the solstice, the first day of summer, and the longest day of the year.
I think some of my favorite memories of summer from being a kid here include the long days, the late evenings, actually the cold nights at that time, but just the abundance of wildlife. The summer in the West is especially sweet because it's so brief. It's a short period when the water's actually warm enough to swim. But the air was clear, the water was clear. It was predictable. We knew what was going to happen in May, June, July, August, September. What happens is that summer becomes more and more critical for survival because so many species just try to get through the winter. And summer is a season of growth, a season of renewal.
As the sun arcs north into a clear June sky, the effects of an early spring cascade into summer, with higher temperatures and the hottest days still lie ahead.
The glaciers have been melting steadily, and those are an incredibly important part of our late season water flow. They kick in just about the time the other streams start to dry up. So in general, it's getting drier and drier.
Fire and water are totally linked in Wyoming. The length of our fire seasons in the West has actually increased by about 3 months since the 1970s. And the reason for that is because snow is melting earlier and snow is coming later. And so we're seeing these changes in snowpack dynamics. It's resulting in larger and more frequent fires and overall longer fire seasons. There's actually some projections that if fires increase so much in Yellowstone, that it's going to transform from a forested ecosystem to a grassland. And all the species that depend on the forest will also be impacted.
autumnal equinox, when the Earth's path around the sun carries us into shorter days and cooler temperatures. In the Greater Yellowstone, autumn is visibly distinct, marked by changes in color and behavior. Autumn is the traditional season of harvest and preparation, both for wildlife and for humanity. In the mountains, streams may dry to a trickle in the fall, while human demand for the same water is at its greatest.
I think in the future, fire is going to be a lot more frequent and bigger fires, and that we're going to have a lot less water. You know, I do worry as a mother that my kids will grow up in a world that's quite different than the world we live in now, and that our landscapes, our ecosystems will be different, and that people might be in conflict more over the limited natural resources. I worry that our economy is going to look quite different as well.
A cow elk travels further than ever before in search of food for her calf. The green meadows she once relied on are now long dried up. Up in the mountains, the effects of drought are magnified.
The whitebark pine, I think of it like the rooftop of the Rockies. It's where it captures the snow during the winter and then shades the snow all summer so that runoff is slow and long-term. So it helps fill the rivers with water. It's a keystone species. A lot of other plant species and biodiversity is supported by whitebark pine. The biggest impact from climate change is to the life cycle of the mountain pine beetle. Since the bark beetle outbreak began in 2000, over 95% of the stands of whitebark are impacted. Without cold springs and falls, the mountain pine beetle are unchecked. And that's why the whitebark have been decimated. Everyone downstream in different states, all the way to the oceans, are impacted by this tree that stands in one place.
Water in the West is changing, especially in late summer and the fall.
We started seeing changes in the spring runoff, which affected fishing. It affected the trout. The water started getting warmer. Every year, summer, August, September, the water was warmer and warmer and warmer.
The pattern is clear. Early snowmelt gives way to warmer, drier summers. And by autumn, the water is all but gone. Fall in the Rockies turns to winter overnight as wildlife head to their winter homes. The winter solstice, the shortest day of the year, when night is far greater than day. Grizzly Bear 399 and her young are out longer than ever this year in search of food. With early spring and summer droughts, most of the berries are long dried up. Bears must gather what precious final calories they can before hibernating for the winter. But not everyone hibernates. And for the humans of the Rockies, winter is a time of celebration and self-expression on the slopes. Snow is the essence of winter and the foundation of water. With the warming temperatures of climate change, snow is more often rain and less predictable. Freezing rain melts snow up to 10 times faster than evaporation and leaves an impenetrable frozen layer on top of what remains.
One thing that's getting harder for wildlife is with the more rain on snow events, you're getting more of this like hard crust. That's hard for animals like elk or deer to break through to get at the grass underneath.
You could actually see red foxes, coyotes that you see diving into the snow. And the deer, you can see them on the buttes just pawing and pawing and pawing at the snow. And
one thing it seems like we're seeing is that just the duration of winter is shorter.
I've heard that some of the big ski areas are already planning on how they're going to get their guests to adapt to a winter where it's not just skiing, where they'll do other activities. They'll come stay at the ski area, but it won't be all about skiing.
Yeah, even just from a recreation standpoint, it seems like ski resorts are going to have to be making more snow, have plans for years where there's just less snow on the landscape, open later, close earlier. It seems like it's definitely going to affect that industry.
So how does climate change affect snow? Well, we're technically still in winter, I think. It hasn't turned to spring quite yet, but it certainly feels like spring. And today, I think we're experiencing what a larger pattern that scientists have been observing, particularly in this region of the Mountain West in the United States, and that snowpack is dwindling on average as the years go by because of climate change. And with that diminishing snowpack, we then have less water runoff to help supply our aquifers and our rivers. And also it leads to quicker drying out of these communities and a higher risk of wildfire. So extrapolating from those two things, one, obviously we know the health risks of wildfire, not only direct impacts on communities that abut these regions, but degraded air quality, which has become a major issue recently. But lack of adequate water has impacts on communities in the agricultural sector, has stressors on the food supply, obviously it has stressors on wildlife, and then recreation-related communities like this has impact on economies too. It's a profound impact on really a fundamental need going forward, and that is clean air and clean water. And if we don't reconstitute that, if we don't get our snowpack, our balance is out of whack.
Snow is melting 3 weeks earlier than in the 1970s. Ski resorts close early this year. Snowpack is far less than normal.
I think it all kind of starts with snow, right? We're getting snow coming later, so they're going into hibernation later, and then they're coming out earlier.
The foxes and coyotes can't get to the mice. We had one summer not too long ago when there were no insects. There's nothing to eat. I just didn't see the swallows. I didn't see the bluebirds. You know, there are just so many cascading effects of the temperature changes.
The rivers and the water.
Temperatures every water start getting affect the river trout. Kill the trees. I just didn't see the effect of the drought.
Snow coming later.
This age-old clock is off.
Well, can you believe an entire year has passed and here we are?
I can't. The years just seem to go flying by, and the season's even faster. After a year of us doing this and paying attention, it's really clear that if you're not watching and taking note, you don't realize how much things have changed. When my dad came to this valley, the seasons were predictable, winter especially. You knew how high the snow was going to get, how deep it was going to get. Now a lot of predictability is gone. I know it's hard to think that in one lifespan that these things would change and change in a way that indicates that it's permanent. I think from all my observations, it's here to stay.
The evidence is clear. We must take action now.
I think there's hope if we start taking climate change seriously and start taking actions now. In Wyoming and around the world, I think we need to reduce our carbon emissions. We need to reduce the risk of wildfire in any way that we can, keep water in our streams, and keep our landscape connected.
Restoration work, I think, benefits humans on so many levels, from using less water, but also supporting the wildlife that we also depend on.
They're probably our main source of oxygen, and that's important because without oxygen, nothing on Earth can survive.
Keeping live trees on the landscape right now is critical because thinking we're going to replant is a great idea, but I think we should try and keep what we have and replant.
We're a fire-adapted ecosystem, and fire is an important component, and suppressing fires year after year is not going to keep our ecosystem in balance. We need to have some fire on the landscape.
And it may seem counterintuitive to let more fires burn and do more controlled burning, but that actually will overall reduce future emissions by allowing us to avoid some of these mega fires.
Protecting these things in these natural systems is exactly what's going to correct the stressors that we're experiencing. Limiting deforestation, making sure that we have natural carbon sinks that continue into perpetuity going forward from here on out is a big part of the solution.
One of the best things we can do is support policies that let nature thrive, that support big tracts of land that are intact. Because as the climate changes, wildlife is going to need to move. They might need to move north. They might need to move up into the mountains. And so the more land that we can keep open and the more nature we can let thrive, the greater the world will do under the pressures of climate change.
One of the things I love is seeing that my kids think about climate change and aspire to grow up and do something about it and make the world better.
What gives me hope for the next generations is that they are more engaged. I'm really surprised how many younger people are not afraid to just jump in and get to work.
I believe there's a lot of things we can do, and the worst thing we can do is live in fear, and if we give people the ability to take action, I think this next generation is going to take that action. Protect nature in all its forms and let nature thrive. Maintain connected and resilient landscapes. Conserve water, both on a personal and an industrial level. Reduce our own carbon footprint as individuals, and support policies that work towards sequestering carbon and supporting alternative energies.
It's the classic example of connection. That ecosystem is just interwoven, and then we're connected to it.
Nature is the ultimate life support system, right? And strangely enough, I think that's also where a lot of the solutions are.
By conserving the lands and water on which all life depends, we all will thrive.